morning, good afternoon, good evening. Won't say good night yet because people are here from around the world. And this is great. My name is Delia Lake, and in both real life and in Second Life, I work to raise awareness and educate people about sustainability. What sustainability means, why it's important, and what we need to do in order to live and do business sustainably. To reach this goal, to reach sustainability, will take the best thinking and best efforts, not of a few, but of many. And I'm very, very pleased to be here today because one of the critical pillars of sustainability is the inclusion and social justice for all people. Just as my humanity depends on your humanity, my sustainability depends on your sustainability. And none of us will see that without there being mutual rights and respect for all. So this conference on International Disability Rights Affirmation is very important to all of us. The title of this session coming up is Disability in the Developing World and the Case of Autism in Kerala. Autism is the most common and of the pervasive development disorders. A neurological disorder that affects brain functioning, autism impacts both children and adults. People on the autism spectrum experience difficulty in verbal and nonverbal communication, in social interactions, and sometimes in daily activities. Our presenter today is Jennifer Sarrett, and I'm very eager to hear what she has to say. Jennifer is a graduate student at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Her research interest is how cultural factors influence the identification, diagnosis, and treatment of autism. Her research is focused on Kerala, India. Because she's new to Second Life, Jennifer requests that you hold your questions and comments for her until after she has finished her presentation. But please do type question at the beginning of your question so it's easier for us to find that in the chat stream. And we're all willing to help you, Jennifer, on this. So Jennifer, we're really eager to hear what you have to say, and we welcome you, and please come up to the podium and begin.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for the wonderful introduction, Delia. As she said, I am a doctoral candidate from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have been studying autism and working in the field of autism for many, many years. And I did my research in Kerala, India. I was comparing parental and professional experiences of autism here in Atlanta and in Kerala, India. And I will explain a little bit more of that in the presentation. Disability studies has always been an integral part of my work. And because of this, I strive to use the language of difference and not deficit. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this approach, but for those who may not be, this means I'm very purposeful about my language and strive to avoid medical model negative descriptions of disabled people. So today, I'm actually going to be discussing how and whether the concept of neurodiversity is useful for communities new to the concept of autism, like the one that I did my research in South India. Autism, as a diagnostic label and an overall concept, is becoming more recognized around the world. At the last time I counted, there were 127 countries with some sort of active autism facility or organization. We also now have World Autism Day, which was started and is promoted by the United Nations. These are just a few of the indicators that people all over the world are beginning to encounter and use the label of autism. Autism is a concept that was born and raised in the West, and so is closely associated with biomedical or Western medical concepts. That means that areas that are currently learning about autism are doing so from that perspective. While autism has and always exists everywhere around the world, the use of the term autism for the constellation of traits we identify as autism is relatively new. So there are now many developing areas that are encountering this word along with all of the biomedical baggage that comes along with it. Cultures are having to figure out how to use this incoming information with the ways they, up until now, had been talking about in treating a particular set of behaviors and characteristics and the individuals who are associated with them. My question for today is, can a neurodiverse perspective be introduced into developing areas? I ask this question because the language about autism that comes from a biomedical tradition is heavily focused on deficits and is largely stigmatizing. The ideas and concept of neurodiversity are a reaction to this. It is also a Western concept that is somewhat reliant on Western traditions of grassroots efforts and civil rights. Neurodiversity is the advocacy position that describes autism as one outcome of natural human neurological diversity. It is based off of the concept of biodiversity, which states that we need to ensure the balance of humanity by protecting the vast diversity of the living things on Earth. Similarly, neurodiversity argues for maintaining a neurologically diverse population in order to maintain a balance of humanity. To this end, there are both political and moral imperatives. Political imperatives center around the creation and maintenance of certain rights, like the right to be educated alongside one's peers, or the right to have equal consideration for employment. Moral imperatives center around tolerance and acceptance, such as teaching peers that autistic children are part of our educational and general communities, or setting up ways to facilitate the success of an autistic adult in a particular job. As I said in my introduction, my research compares autism experiences in Kerala, India, and Atlanta, Georgia. Kerala is a state in India along the southwestern coast. It is a democratically elected communist government that has led to high access to education and medical care. Because of this, Kerala has development indicators that are close to those of Western nations. They have the lowest birth and infant mortality rate and the highest literacy rate in India. My work looked at which cultural factors influence autism experiences, including an analysis of the physical spaces autism is found, as well as the role of urbanicity, socioeconomic class, and the presence or absence of certain materials. I interviewed and observed parents and professionals and spoke with individuals in the general public about autism and disability. My conclusion has a set of practical guidelines for individuals interested in engaging in autism-related work in diverse communities at home or abroad, as well as a discussion of the ethical challenges I encountered in my work, one of which is related to today's presentation on whether neurodiversity is useful and should be promoted in developing cultures. For Keralans, autistic individuals, who are most often labeled as mentally retarded, especially in the rural areas, have very questionable futures. Parents and professionals are unsure of where these children will be and what they will do as adults. They do not know where any autistic or intellectually impaired adults currently are, as they are not highly integrated into the community. Children with autistic characteristics, who may or may not also have intellectual impairments, are uniformly considered unable to learn, be taught, or participate in educational environments. This is more so the case for children with more significant traits, such as nonverbal communication styles or frequent use of behavioral self-regulation techniques. Schools and homes generally take a custodial approach to these children, which means that adults are focused on taking care of their basic needs and keeping them busy. This is related to both cultural attitudes and different access to and styles of instruction techniques. Although Kerala and India has imperatives to educate disabled children in the general education environment, this is considered to only really apply to children with low levels of impairment and/or those with physical impairments. This leads to educational segregation such that there are separate schools for children with intellectual impairments in Kerala, most of which are run by nuns. Throughout the rest of India, however, autistic children and children with significant impairments have nowhere to go and so often stay at home and don't even get the school experience. While I was doing my research, something really amazing happened. This popular television singing competition, Idea Star Singer, which is similar to American Idol, had an autistic contestant named Sujeesh. Because of the popularity of this show, there was a distinct difference in public awareness because of his being of autism because of his being on the show. And this happened almost exactly in the middle of my research trip, so it was really kind of good timing. My translator, Joy Paul, and I came to call this pre-Sujeesh and post-Sujeesh periods in research. It was like I was there for the Carolyn Rain Man. This was the first popular representation of autism in the community. Sujeesh was presented as what is called in the disability community as a supercrip. This label refers to disability representation that shows disabled people doing things that are difficult for everyone, including non-disabled people. The classic image of this is the wheelchair user on the side of a mountain. Here we have Sujeesh being represented as a disabled person with extremely high talent for singing. Looking at comments about him both on the show and in online comments of the videos of him, there were a lot of common thoughts. One was spiritual. Kerala has a large Christian community, as well as Hindu and Muslim communities. Many people talked about how Sujeesh is blessed or is a miracle. Other people complained that the network, AsiaNet, was exploiting this poor disabled boy. There were many people who expressed sympathy for his mother, and many admitted to openly crying for her. Finally, there was a lot of discussion about the special talents of autism. This last one is something I encountered a lot in my research. Parents and professionals both would ask me how to encourage or identify an autistic child's special talent. So this trope was fairly common. So as the recognition of autism was growing in the community and people were encountering these tropes, I spent some time thinking about my role as a disability advocate. Should I encourage and frequently discuss neurodiversity? My doubts centered around the fact that because Kerala and India are fairly poor global regions, accommodation is not an economic priority. So I was not sure if they would hear me arguing for acceptance and accommodation when it may not be fiscally feasible. Relatedly, I wasn't sure if promoting neurodiversity was just another form of Western paternalism, the white researcher telling the brown researchers why certain perspectives are bad, outdated, or stigmatizing. Then I was worried about whether it even fit into another culture. Are there certain social hierarchies that, if suddenly changed, would damage the structure of the community? Did the language I used to describe autism, which was not deficit-based, even make sense to other people? To be honest, I wasn't even sure my translator used my language of difference and not deficit, despite my direct instructions to do so. These are important questions to ask and to consider. In the end, I decided that while directly encouraging the use of neurodiverse language and concepts to my informants may be overly pushy and paternalistic, by modeling this way of talking and thinking about autism, I could simply provide it as an alternative narrative. So I decided that this was, in fact, an ethical project. So how would one introduce this alternative narrative in new cultural environments? I'm going to go quickly over 3 ways I think are useful: narrative association, physician information, and community integration. And I don't think any of these are overly pushy or paternalistic, but they are ways to promote neurodiversity in a more subtle way. Narrative association means using a familiar, disenfranchised group as an example when explaining the concept of neurodiversity, usually when asked. By aligning neurodiversity with the history and stories of other rights-based movements in the area, people can more readily relate to the issues and meanings. Most, if not all, cultures have a history of some oppressed group rising up and insisting on rights. In Kerala, this could be the caste, lower caste, or tribal struggle. Now there are government positions held by tribal people, and, at least on paper, caste is no longer a viable identifier. So this is one example of a group that you could say, similar to how the caste or tribal people asserted their personhood, the same can be done for people with intellectual and developmental differences like autism. Another way to promote neurodiversity is to provide it within the training and texts physicians encounter in their training. By presenting autism to doctors and healers using a language of difference and not deficit, while presenting the biomedical information that's being sought, physicians will learn this alternative narrative and then perhaps use and promote it in their communities. Also, descriptions of autism should include abilities and possibilities for the future instead of just difficulties and bleak futures. This is critical because physicians and healers are always held in high esteem in their communities. And so the way that they can talk about people who with certain disabilities and differences will usually take on in the community. Finally, autistic children and adults need to be more integrated into their communities by going to school and working in local stores, in agriculture, or just being out in towns and public areas. Obviously, this goes for people of all types of physical, intellectual, psychiatric, developmental differences, but since this is a presentation on autism and neurodiversity, then I'm focusing on that. We know that visibility and familiarity lessens stigma, so this is a very powerful tool to use. There also needs to be responsible media representation. The representation that came along with Sojish was overly sensational and should have been better balanced with some factual information about autism, instead of just stories of his and his mother's difficulties. The opening of the show where he was introduced had this soft focused vignette of Sujish holding his ears and his mother crying and all this kind of horrible stuff. So that could have been better done, I think. In summary, the term and autism and the concepts associated with it are spreading around the world, regardless of whether this is a good idea or not. What should be encouraged now in doing so in a balanced, stigma-free manner by allowing neurodiversity to be presented alongside biomedical perspectives. We can learn from our past and hope that future communities will encounter and choose to adhere to a neurodiverse perspective. But this will only happen if the perspective is provided on an equal platform with the biomedical perspective. As most of the information is coming from the West, this makes this our moral imperative. I want to thank my university as well as the Organization for Autism Research for supporting my research. And I want to thank all of you for listening to my presentation and for taking time to attend. I can now take some comments and questions. I'm only slightly nervous of how that happens in Second Life, but I'd like to open the floor now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I can ask a first question. Did you also study autism in Georgia? And Mia, you can use either, but if you use voice, please let me know so I can listen to you and type it out.
My research didn't actually directly study autism acceptance. So I didn't study autism acceptance in Georgia formally. However, I'm always kind of looking out for it. And when I kind of navigate my world here and talk to parents here, I am noticing that more and more parents are using neurodiverse language, even if they don't know the word neurodiversity or have never encountered the concept of, the language of difference and not deficit. So one of the things I'm working on right now is trying to figure out ways to approach professionals in the area and let them know that, hey, parents are going to come to you with this way of thinking. You should be able to use the language of neurodiversity when you identify it in your own community, because otherwise you run the risk of really alienating some family members and adults and kids with autism as well. How did I select the location of study? I'm sorry if I jumped ahead with that. I had two advisors when I came to Emory, and then I had to choose one by the end. And both of them, without even consulting each other, recommended Kerala. And I had originally wanted to work in a Buddhist community because I'm fairly familiar with Buddhism. But the more I learned about Kerala, the more I realized it's really quite perfect for this kind of work. And the reason is because since it's a democratically elected communist government that in the 70s began having a lot of grassroots activism for better education and healthcare, it has incredibly high access for both of those things. And so, in a way, I see Kerala as where a lot of developing nations are going to be in 15, 20 years, what with sort of the globalization of Western aid and education techniques. So it's kind of a way for me to say, hey, this is what happened while I was in Kerala. This information is very useful for developing areas, in the now and in the future. You're welcome. Oh, thank you, Delia. Okay, Mia.
Can you guys hear me?
I can, yeah.
Great, thank you. I'd like to preface my question by thanking you for coming out. I really loved your speech. And my question is, how do you feel about work programs like Las Vegas's Opportunity Village, which provide jobs for folks with intellectual disabilities? Do you think that that it's good that they're giving them work in general, or one of my concerns is that it isn't so good with integration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as long as they're being paid the same as everybody else, that's great. I mean, I don't know how much you're familiar with the goodwill drama that's been happening the past few years. They pay their disabled workers, much below minimum wage. which is really sad. I also think that they should be working alongside non-disabled workers for sure, either with or without a job coach as needed. There is a lot of research that has come out showing that for a community, it's actually more economically viable to have job coaches and work facilitated in that way rather than sheltered workshop systems. And so I'm really hoping that that kind of there's the problem that people see is that it takes more money up front, but the payback later is much greater. So I think that those kinds of programs are great as long as they're not just, sticking people with, intellectual and developmental differences sort of in the back filing away all day with no access to anybody else. And as long as the proper supports are there. I'm not familiar with the program that you referenced, but yeah, I'll have to look in and see what their structures are. So as long as they do it well, I say go for it. I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry. My mic is bouncing back your audio. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Is there another question? I have to say, all of you have much better names than I do. The most unusual finding in my research.
Having a little lag here, but there's. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing it up on the screen. I think the most interesting finding of my work was centers around what are called explanatory models. And explanatory models is basically the way that we as individuals kind of justify and explain our illnesses and our disabilities. So the answers to the questions of why me, why now, all of that. It kind of goes beyond cause, but includes cause as well. I was expecting before arriving in Kerala that I would be hearing a lot of sort of spiritually based explanatory models. So those saying that, my kid's autism or disability was caused by karma or the evil eye or things of that sort. But I didn't hear that at all. Instead, half of my parents over there said that they think that their child's disability was caused by something related to the pregnancy, either an accident in pregnancy or being, one person's like being kicked in the belly or taking, Western medicine while pregnant, things like that. The other half had a variety of answers. A few said, I don't know, but a few said, too much television or whatever. But the complete absence of spiritually based explanatory models was really interesting to me. And I think, and I have no way of, definitively proving this, but I think that it's because of the high access to Western medicine in Kerala, kind of has familiarized the population with these more biomedical ways of explaining things. So injuries and accidents and things like that are very biological. And, in India, having a genetic condition is incredibly stigmatizing. It stigmatizes the whole family. So if you have a family member with even something like cancer, then it can really make marrying off siblings and cousins and things like that very difficult. So nobody relied on that kind of explanation, although one or two parents did say, I think autism in general might be heritable or genetic, but my kids, autism wasn't caused by that. And there is a chance that, they were giving me these explanations because I was a white researcher from America, but just the fact that they had access to that way of talking about autism, I found really fascinating and really, like I said, probably the result of this high visibility and accessibility of Western medicine. I found it fascinating. You may not, or yeah, maybe. I see another question here that says, does the political philosophy of the government impact attitudes towards health issues? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. The government, I would say no. Can you clarify your question a little bit more? You mean the communism? Okay.
There's a lot of people adding information. So do you want me to read aloud so you don't have to try and figure it? Oro clarifies, you are crediting the West with the decline in superstition rather than local factors such as the political nature of the government.
No, let me clarify. I'm not attributing that to the West. I'm attributing that to the high presence of Western style medicine. So a lot of the doctors are Western trained, in India. So it's that particular approach, which is, we refer to as Western medicine. But the socialist government has allowed everybody to have pretty easy access to Western style hospitals. Now, Kerala is also kind of one of the major centers of Ayurveda medicine. And so that is equally as accessible, and there are Ayurvedic hospitals. And that has a different approach, but it's also not very spiritual, at least not anymore. Historically, it has been. And Ayurveda is focused on the balance of constitutions of the body. So it's still kind of biological, but I didn't hear much Ayurveda explanation. And again, I think that my presence probably altered what answers I was getting, but I think it's just the style of medicine that is available, more highly available in Kerala than the rest of India. The medical testing. Okay, so that actually is a really interesting question. The tools and techniques we use to diagnose autism over here, the gold standards are the Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale, or ADOS, and the Autism Diagnostic Interview, which is the ADIR. Those are really, really expensive. And so physicians and pediatricians and whoever else, professionals, can't afford them. And so they kind of just go off, as many people in the States do as well, their knowledge of the diagnostic criteria. But autism is a really difficult thing to diagnose. It's very subtle, and most people have to go through some sort of training or something to diagnose it, but that's not available there. And so you do get somewhat of a different population identified, but it's really variable. So I was introduced to some children who, from my perspective, were not autistic, maybe were, I don't know, but were identified as autistic there. And so that could have been sort of certain clinicians being a little bit overzealous with this new diagnostic label of autism. In the rural areas, nobody was called autistic at all, and the pediatricians there were very surprised that I found children with autistic characteristics. And when we talked more about what autism is, kind of said, oh yeah, okay, maybe I have seen it. And so in the rural areas, I found children through the teachers, because through some sort of training, they had come across the definition and diagnostic criteria of autism. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, it's the diagnostic tools are financially inaccessible all over the country. You're welcome.
Okay, here's another question.
Okay.
Lukey, he says autism sometimes has hidden gifts, and it sometimes could be said that all normal people are not as talented as some people who are autistic. Fitting in may be a problem, but I feel the talents go far beyond what we think, and we can learn a lot from this. I've seen this from he's talking about the savants, but each person shows a talent. Do you see that?
I have, it's interesting. I've worked with, at least 100 people who fall somewhere on the autism spectrum since I began in this field, 14 years ago. I have never worked with or really, interacted with anybody I would consider a savant. I have, met children who have really good memories, better than mine, perhaps have better visuospatial skills, but nothing that I would, or I don't think anybody really would classify as savant level. Only 10% of the autistic population really has these savant skills. But it's really, I think, really interesting and really valuable. And but it's nothing that I personally have experienced, unfortunately. So, yeah, and you're right. I think there's a lot to learn from the different skill sets that anybody on the autism spectrum shows, and we can find different niches for everybody that way.
Okay, another one. Wow, lag. Dr. K says there has it that the helpers usually couldn't find someone to help themselves release their inner desires and ambitions. And as we know, some of them are in the autism, so it's point for them to get somewhere, some keys to fix. I think that was a statement, not a question.
Okay.
Let's see, did we
I don't know what the helpers are.
Here? Let's see if we can get Dr. K to answer that. And are there any other questions? I don't think I missed anything, but it's possible.
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions or comments or criticisms? I'm open to all.
Okay, Dr. K is clarifying helpers or doctors. They have inner and potential autism inside.
The doctors have inner autism. I know that there is the common misunderstanding that you have the real child inside of the autistic shell, which is, really stigmatizing and inappropriate and inaccurate. I'm not sure about the doctors and their understandings of having autistic tendencies in themselves. Although, if you ask me, I think everybody has some sort of autistic tendency. So I'm not sure if that gets to your comment. If it doesn't, or
I think that's going to provoke some more information coming. But in the meantime, we have this question from Mary Bicken. If a small community is coping with the autistic tendencies or behaviors, then they have no need to identify that by the name autistic?
Yeah, I think, that's one of the great things about the autistic community is that um, people can choose or not to choose to use that label for themselves. And many self-advocates that I know find it very empowering to use it. Um, and I know many people who use it without a formal diagnosis, and I think that that's, kind of fine as well. And people who, don't find it a useful tool or a category to apply to their lives. And I think that that's great also.
You were looking at a developing country and looking at a more developed compared to a less developed area of it. Are there parts of the U.S. or other developed countries, maybe occupation rather than geographic, or maybe a socioeconomic rather than geographic, that need more education about autism?
I think that lower socioeconomic groups definitely need not just more information about autism, but more information about their rights. And um, yeah, their rights in interacting with professionals and physicians and teachers, because a lot of the lower socioeconomic families I've interacted with here just kind of do what doctors tell them to do. If doctors say, put your kid on this medicine or this 5 medicines, then they just kind of unquestioningly do that. And I think that more information about usefulness or non-usefulness of medication in autism is useful. Um, and then, I mean, I don't think that there is a population in this country that could, that would not benefit from some more accurate autism-related information. We just see in the media too much sensationalism and, narratives of magical cures or devastating lives, and I find that kind of infuriating. There was just an article that came out today about a family that gave their son surgery on his vocal cords so he wouldn't scream so much and so loudly. And that was really disturbing. I think that if we lived in a community where more people understood about autism and were more kind of accommodating, then they wouldn't have found the need to make their son have that surgery just so they could go to restaurants and public spaces. So, yeah, I think everybody needs more information.
Okay,
Mia.
this is an interesting question from Mia. Autism Speaks. Yep. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yes, Lukey, it is very sad. Autism Speaks is infuriating. They they're very focused on cure and rehabilitation instead of acceptance and tolerance and accommodation and things like that. There was another recent article, a mother who got a job with Autism Speaks, who has an autistic child, was asking for a more flexible work schedule because to accommodate her child's various educational and therapeutic needs, and they denied her that. And if any organization should be more accommodating to that, it should be Autism Speaks. And they have no autistic people on staff. So obviously they're not my favorite. And I kind of, they're kind of the go-to in this country for autism-related information, and people give them lots of money without really understanding their perspective, or that there is an alternative perspective out there that could be had. So that's, yeah, you kind of hit me in a sore spot with that one. but again, they do provide a lot of funding for facilities that you have to work within to make changes. So that's kind of the frustrating part of it. You're welcome. There are a lot of disability groups like that. Yeah, I would assume a place like Second Life has a lot of autism support groups. Cool, thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments or anything? Yeah, for my research, I actually mainly focused on children with more significant characteristics of autism, and the reason was so that I could have a more similar research group. In India, things like Asperger's are not really recognized as disabilities usually because they're not, as obvious or salient. So, but in general, in my work, yeah, I do look at all types of autism, and I actually do a lot of thinking about and writing about and teaching about mental illness as well. Oh, well, welcome. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and found it relevant.
Well, if there aren't more questions, then I will thank Jennifer for sharing with us her research. That was really interesting. I used to be a special education teacher, and I know there's a lot of different perspectives on how you work with the children with autism, but this is really useful in terms of working with the general public. Our audiences make these sessions really helpful by being so interactive. So if you have some thoughts about this topic that you would like to share, you can certainly post them on the blog entry, and there's the URL. I continue to thank Sky. I need to probably let you know that she's getting a little embarrassed by this, but really she's been doing a lot of wonderful work for this project, so she deserves all our thanks. Lady Slipper and Kara have been really nice. Kara's legs are probably getting tired back there because she's been standing there most of the day being a creator. That's very helpful to the audience. She's been working since early this morning. And I also want to thank Dusa Dragonesh and Metaverse TV. They are actually filming today's events. We will have an archive of these sessions. They're streaming this whole conference live. So if you have people who don't go into Second Life and have no clue what it is you do here, you can show them that link and they'll be able to see what you're doing here. They may be able to see you. You can wave. So thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you, Jennifer. It's been really nice working with you, and welcome to Second Life. And everyone can take a little break now.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to personally thank Ice Guy and Gentle Heron for all your help in getting me set up here. And I know I might have been frustrating at times, but I appreciate all of your attention. And feel free to email me if you have other questions or anything else. I'm going to log off now. It's dinner time here in Atlanta. So thank you very much.
Jennifer, before you go, do you want to post your email if you wanted them to email you?
Yeah, it should be up on the board behind me on the PowerPoint. It's JSAR.
If you wouldn't mind just typing it.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it right here. Also, is there going to be I know it's being live streamed. Is there going to be a recording of it, of the whole conference
yes.
that I could watch later? Yeah?
Yes. Yes, I'll let you know. And there's her email.
There's my email. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank
I
you
would
very
wave
much.
if I knew how.
Enjoy your dinner.
Okay, thank you. Bye.